Happy Friday, everybody. James Hancock here. Just caught Darren Aronofsky's new flick Mother, starring Jennifer Lawrence. I should say from the outset that I'm a massive Darren Aronofsky fan, so this review will be slightly biased. But initially, I will hold off on any and all spoilers, and then I will give you fair warning, just in case you want to go into it totally fresh. For those of you who don't know, Darren Aronofsky is a filmmaker from New York, came roaring out of the gate with a super micro-budget feature called Pi, which he followed up with Requiem for a Dream, as well as a lot of other films that I really enjoy, like The Wrestler and Black Swan. Some people really love The Fountain. That is not necessarily my cup of tea, nor was his most recent film, Noah, which, in my humble opinion, was the weakest of all of his movies. I think Aronofsky's at his strongest with smaller scale productions that have slightly more sinister aspirations, which is why Requiem for a Dream, The Wrestler, and Black Swan are my three favorites. Just in general broad strokes, I think Mother is a very strong movie, but it's not going to upset the rankings of my favorite Aronofsky movies. Darren Aronofsky hasn't made a lot of movies, but I would say this one ranks probably right around the middle for me. I think it's definitely better than The Fountain, and it's definitely better than Noah. Again, I know some of you out there are like, fuck you, Fountain's his best movie. If that's your opinion, more power to you. It is a visionary movie. It just doesn't appeal to my particular taste. Obviously, we're in very subjective territory here. But what I do like about Mother is that it's a movie that really keeps you guessing from start to finish. And it's also a movie that's going to be wide open to an incredible range of interpretations. And I think Aronofsky did that very deliberately. This is a movie about motherhood, but it's also about relationships. It's about uninvited guests. It's about the creative process. It's about fandom run wild. It is a very specific, intimate story told almost exclusively through the perspective of Jennifer Lawrence's character, yet it manages to touch on so many different topics and issues. I think this is one that's going to have people very enthusiastically discussing its ramifications over drinks at dinner after seeing it. And I strongly recommend that you go see this movie with a bunch of movie maniacs. Go out to dinner afterwards, have a few drinks, and then sink your teeth into it. I have a feeling as people discuss it, it's just going to open up like an oyster with all these different interpretations and possibilities. The cast is pretty exceptional across the board. I'm a massive Ed Harris and Michelle Pfeiffer fan, so I was thrilled to see both of them in fine form. Javier Bardem, total badass. He's terrific in this as well. Even actors who don't show up very much, like Brian and Domhnall Gleeson, they're terrific. I mean, there's not really a false note struck by any of the actors throughout the entire movie. If I were to caution anybody about things that they might not like, this is a movie where information is going to be withheld from you pretty much the entire movie, so that can be frustrating for some people if they're not occasionally spoon-fed some information that they crave. But I would argue that there's a trail of breadcrumbs along the way that'll help you come to grips with what the story actually is, but Aronofsky does zero hand-holding throughout this story. It's also sometimes hard to see a 2-hour movie where the central character is in a fevered, emotional state for much of it. There's a lot of like shrieking and growling and screaming, and that can be emotionally taxing to watch. I feel like there's no worse compliment to give a movie than say it's interesting. Is usually what people say when they didn't like it, but they don't want to say so. But I will say this movie is more interesting than entertaining, and I realize that definitely is a backhanded compliment. There are only a few scenes where I was like, whoa, I'm really into this. I'm really feeling like that exhilaration that I crave when I go to a movie. When I go to a movie, I'm basically looking for like a rock concert for my eyes and ears. I want sensory overload. I want hyper-stylized stories. I basically want a heightened sense of experience. I don't seek out movies that are the creative equivalent of a wet blanket. Not that this movie is a wet blanket in any way, shape, or form, but it's just a very grim, foreboding story with a lot of ambiguity. And that's not necessarily what some people are in the mood for if they've had a brutal week at work and they just want to sit back in the chair, drink a Coke, and relax. I would argue the movie for that is coming out next week, Kingsman: The Golden Circle, and if you look on my videos, I actually posted that review last night. That is an absolute blast that just sweeps you along. Mother is a very different experience. However, I consider myself fortunate that 2 days in a row, I've had 2 good movie-going experiences. Anytime I get to see a Matthew Vaughn movie and a Darren Aronofsky movie back-to-back, that's a good weekend at the movies, because usually most weekends, there's nothing that I'm really excited to see. Just as a movie fan, that was a lot of fun for me. So before I get into specifics, I'll just say Mother is an incredibly solid movie. I think it'll excite a lot of debate. I love seeing Darren Aronofsky active again. It had been way too long since his last film. That said, I don't think it's his strongest effort, but I'm just glad to see him back in action because hopefully this movie will make piles of money and that'll allow him to get back to the drawing board very, very quickly. So last warning before I get into specific spoilers, 3, 2, 1, etc. All right, all bets are off. But what's interesting about this movie and the idea of it getting Darren Aronofsky back to the drawing board, this is a movie about the cycle of birth and death that is involved in every creative life, whether you're a poet, filmmaker, musician, novelist. I don't know if I've seen a movie in recent memory that better captures the various stages of what a creator goes through when they are in the public eye, from seeking out material to be inspired by, the actual work, the reception of the work, how people's responses can spiral wildly out of control in ways that can be very destructive and violent, and then ultimately burning the whole goddamn house down and starting over again once you're completely fed up with all the trappings of fame and stardom. And Darren Aronofsky is an interesting character. I mean, this is a guy who's made small budget films, large budget films, dated a lot of movie stars. I mean, I don't know if he's still with her or not, but he definitely dated Jennifer Lawrence for a long time. I find him to be a pretty fascinating character. And anybody who consistently cranks out good movies that I love over a long period of time, I'm naturally going to be on their side. So from the outset, I kind of suspected what this movie was going to be going for. I knew almost nothing about the story apart from what I saw in the trailer. And the trailer is very good at keeping its cards very close to its chest. But the movie begins with Jennifer Lawrence fully charred and ablaze as a house burns down, and Javier Bardem from the ashes drawing forth this strange crystal with all this weird like ember-like qualities and setting it down on this little rack. And then the house magically rebuilds itself. You know, walls get repainted, everything reforms. And then from that point on, we're basically in the shoes of Jennifer Lawrence from the point where she wakes up to the point where we come full circle and everything burns down again and the cycle begins anew. And while I suspected that's where the story is going to be headed, Aronofsky zigs and zags and adds so many crazy twists into the story that you often forget that's what the movie's about. Javier Bardem plays a very, very famous poet who has a bad case of writer's block. And as a way of handling his writer's block or just procrastinating, he keeps allowing strangers to come into their home and overstay their welcome. And these strangers oftentimes are really eccentric and really demanding and pretty destructive. I mean, initially it's just Ed Harris. Then suddenly his wife, Michelle Pfeiffer's there, and suddenly their kids are there. And every time more people enter the house, there's more violence, more confrontations, more suspicion. And all Jennifer Lawrence wants is for everybody to get the fuck out of her house so she can focus on rebuilding it, spending time with her husband, and having a baby. That's all she really wants. In addition to his writer's block, Javier Bardem is also impotent. He's married to a very, very beautiful woman who's half his age, but he's unable to perform sexually. But as the story progresses and Javier Bardem's able to get back to work with more poetry, and they're successfully able to conceive a child, their lives at that point really start to spiral out of control. But what's interesting is that it all takes place in this house. You could almost do this as a play on Broadway or off Broadway because it lends itself to that intimate, black box, intense drama. And there are times where the movie starts to take on the dimensions of a nightmare. First in the form of this ridiculous funeral that spirals out of control with increasingly demanding guests showing up and making themselves at home and just taking over the house. And then with this insane fan gathering that initially starts out with just fans basically ripping apart the house because they're trying to just get a piece of this creator that they love so much. But it eventually evolves into like political protests and like a military invasion. It's completely, totally bananas. And the movie gets truly dark. We get into Rosemary's Baby territory near the end, which is very appropriate given the style of the poster for the movie. As basically the fans who are so hungry for a piece of Javier Bardem that he basically gives this child to the fans and they promptly like sacrifice it on an altar and devour it just so they can have a little bit of piece of this creator that they love so much. But I think says a lot about Darren Aronofsky's ambivalent attitude toward fans, because while fans allow artists and filmmakers and actors and actresses to earn a living doing what they love, they can also be pretty aggressive, and I imagine that Aronofsky's learned quite a bit about celebrity culture by virtue of the fact that he's involved with Jennifer Lawrence. I'm sure there will be a lot of people when they watch this movie who will resent the insinuation that he's making about fan culture. But I imagine there'll be just as many people who really sympathize with what Jennifer Lawrence's character is going through. Every time there are uninvited guests she's the one who has to clean up. Every time someone breaks something in the house, she's the one who has to fix it. Every time Javier Bardem has writer's block, she has to be there to be supportive. She has to be the nurturer. She has to basically be the bedrock so that he can do his thing. And he's a classic narcissist who can only think about his needs, his work. And I guess to a degree, every artistic personality has to be a bit of a narcissist. Otherwise, it would be very, very difficult for them to carve out the time for writing, filmmaking, whatever the case might be. But the rage that Jennifer Lawrence's character feels throughout the story, I imagine a lot of people will sympathize with if they feel like, say, they're married to somebody who hosts too many parties in order to curry favor at work, or whatever the case might be. There's just a lot of real world application in spite of the supernatural kind of fanciful aspect of this story. For my part, it's a relief to see Jennifer Lawrence doing these kind of movies, because as much as I enjoy watching her whooping ass in Days of Future Past as Mystique, I feel like there are times where she has flirted with overexposure in subpar mainstream movies. I did not like the Hunger Games franchise, and I thought X-Men Apocalypse was a genuinely bad movie, but I do think she is a colossal talent. And you watch a movie like Silver Linings Playbook, and you're like, whoa, she's got some serious acting chops. Or you watch American Hustle, once again, smaller role, but really, really fantastic performance. And I feel like as long as she keeps working with great filmmakers like David Russell, like Darren Aronofsky, I think she could accumulate an incredible body of work. She's incredibly young, she's incredibly talented, she's incredibly beautiful. I mean, there's really no limits to where she might go, as long as she continues to find interesting work like this. And I feel like Mother really allows her to flex her acting muscles in a lot of different directions. It's safe to say I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. I didn't love this movie. I didn't walk out of there just thinking, oh my God, what a fucking amazing movie-going experience. But it was still pretty damn good. And definitely probably the most interesting movie that people have an opportunity to see this weekend. So if you are a fan of dark, subversive dramas that have a little bit more going on behind the scenes or beneath the text than your average movie, definitely give it a go. Or if you're just a Darren Aronofsky fan, you will not be disappointed. We all probably have our different rankings of his movies, but I would say that no matter how you rank your favorite Darren Aronofsky movies, Mother will not be at the bottom of it. So thank you so much for watching my review. If you want to hear more from me, you can hunt me down on my podcast, Wrong Reel, on iTunes, or you can find me on Twitter at Colbrax. Please feel free to leave a comment in the comments below, and I'd also appreciate it if you consider subscribing to my channel. Hope everyone has an amazing weekend, and I'll be back on Sunday night to review the next episode of The Orville. Talk to y'all later.